Before the invading Europeans set up rubber companies in Kasai, there were already networks of trade including rubber during the transatlantic slave trade. The last evidence of trade including rubber was observed in the 1870s to late 1880s, where the trade of rubber would have already reached the Lodja to Kuba kingdom regions. Invading Europeans essentially went into partnership with notables of kingdoms and trading states to eventually take over and control the trade routes. From this point on, they deceitfully engaged in the business of slave trading under the disguise they are redeeming people throughout Kasai. This act of redeeming was also facilitated by missionary churches. This process of acquiring people through evangelization and purchasing enslaved people simultaneously formed heterogeneous groups within Kasai, who in cases would willfully become assets of the invading Europeans. This is stated respectfully. Irrespective of ethnic origin, all redeemed or uprooted populations within Kasai were generally presented as Baluba, which at the time, specifically within Kasai, was a term synonymous with wanderers and a slave, providing there was not a distinction drawn with the Baluba of Kananga. These uprooted populations will collectively end up in Luebo, West Kasai. Here in West Kasai is where they were teaching their gospel, producing evangelists, laborers and sentries for the false public. The language of communication to achieve this was the existing language of trade, which we know today as Kiluba. Up to the late 1890s, sentries were used to support the development of plantations on lands throughout Kasai, which became the property of invading Europeans. At this time period, the Kasai Company was not in existence, but there were up to 14 independent companies throughout Kasai regions who were using their allegedly redeemed populations to encourage their supposedly represented groups to harvest rubber throughout Kasai. This time period, specifically from 1895, would spark the first major revolt in West Kasai, which I argue was a result of poor treatment to populations being forced to harvest rubber. This will be touched on the following parts within this series. We can find the 1890s became a period where ethnic categories were being misused or managed to portray any desired characteristics to the reading audience. This played a role in making it difficult to understand or decipher ethnographic material and reports concerning rubber-related atrocities within Kasai. Some clarity to rubber-related atrocities can be found, the best example being about the 1899 massacre of Bianga people who refused or failed to meet their rubber quotas and other demands set by the missionaries' sentries. In summary, this story explains that the sentries, led by the appointed ruler Nsapu, was carrying out orders on behalf of their European patrons. These orders, as I explained, evolved around ensuring the subjected population harvests rubber. The population in this case were known as Bianga, who failed to meet Nsapu's demands. Nsapu gathered a portion of this population into an enclosed fence and killed many of them, and it was reported some of these people were cannibalized. This incident would fall into the interest of the American missionaries, where the massacred population were part of their target race for evangelization. The American missionaries reported this case to their then European authorities, which created an image of morale for the American missionaries. The case was brought forth by the American missionaries obtaining or presenting witnesses, which today is responsible for one of the most notable photos, including a chief named Honga Nzoka, who was reported to have been the main witness to the Bianga massacre. Overall, the headings of Kasai's rubber-related atrocities became presented as atrocities against the Bakuba and Baluba, which were the wordings projected from the American missionaries and then excelled by the British Museum agent, who categorized the so-called Bakuba being originally of Baluba stock. The Bianga people were also known to be or part of the Shoa or Shoba people, and they have since been referred to as Bakuba people, if not Bushongo. Not sure if this is associated, but 2 years after 1899, the 14 independent companies in Kasai merged together to form the Kasai Company in the year 1901, where the headquarters was located in West Kasai in a place called Dima, which now left all Kasai rubber-related incidents under the responsibility of the Kasai Rubber Company. In relations to my earlier statements about ethnographic material, the Kasai Company would have also emerged alongside the British Museum agents who relayed the indigenous Kasai population's artifacts through this Kasai Company. This is highlighted so you understand the company was not only used for rubber exploitation, and it's played a role in the alteration of later ethnic categories. When the Kasai Company was in full force, many of the populations who retaliated to the exploitation would have become pacified after suffering defeats from their force publique. It is in this period some populations reported to have emerged from rebellious regions had the drastic contrast on how they were reported. Even in the early 20th century, there were some notable images within the Tetela Sankuru district displaying images of rubber workers, which contradicts earlier reports of rebelling groups of the same region. The Kasai Company's regime became more strategic in challenging the negative publicity and techniques used to get the indigenous populations to produce the rubber. Later reports and depictions of rubber work within Kasai will attempt to portray mutually beneficial trade, implying all the inhabitants within Kasai willfully extracted rubber to sell to the Kasai Company, which still was not enough to overshadow the evidential murders and attempted ethnocide due to rubber demands. Consider the indigenous retaliations to this rubber regime within Kasai resulted in notable invading Europeans being killed. Reports of invading Europeans being killed or their remains being shipped back to their homeland was a form of evidence that the subjected indigenous populations were responding to something. Which leads me to part 14, entitled the Lulua Revolt, which was famously captioned as the Batetela Revolt. Thanks for watching.
Bena You